One cabin door opened, and Keddie's quiet never returned again. Inside cabin 28, answers began disappearing before investigators ever arrived. 3 victims were found, but one child was suddenly missing. The first question was not who, but what survived unnoticed. Keddie looked peaceful until silence became the loudest evidence there. A resort cabin became a timeline investigators still struggle to close. Every confirmed detail led toward another unanswered and uncomfortable question. The case began with family, neighbors, and one ordinary weekend. By morning, Cabin 28 carried more questions than physical evidence. 4 lives were taken, and certainty never fully followed them. The woods around Keddie kept quiet, but records kept shifting. Before theories, there was a home, a mother, and children. Keddie sat in Plumas County, surrounded by trees and isolation. The resort cabins offered cheap shelter, community, and fragile privacy. Sue Sharp had come west seeking a more stable beginning. Her children knew the narrow roads, neighbors, and mountain rhythms. Cabin 28 was ordinary, which made the aftermath harder later. Nearby cabins meant people were close, yet answers stayed distant. The family's routine depended on school, friends, and small-town habits. Nothing about the setting promised the questions that later followed. On April 11th, ordinary errands helped build the final timeline. John Sharp and Dana Wingate moved between Quincy and Keddie. Sheila planned to sleep nearby, a choice that spared her. Tina moved between neighboring homes before the night closed in. Young boys stayed inside, unaware of history forming around them. By evening, the cabin held routine, fatigue, and hidden risk. Witness memories later became pieces of a difficult public puzzle. The night offered fragments, not the clean answers investigators needed. Every hour after dusk became important, then painfully hard to prove. Small movements mattered, because the official timeline remained painfully incomplete. Darkness held ordinary sounds, then a silence nobody understood. The neighboring cabins stayed close enough to haunt later questions. Inside Cabin 28, routine objects became part of evidence overnight. No one knew which detail would later demand the most attention. The timeline bent around absences, sightings, and remembered conversations afterward. Investigators would later chase minutes that never sat perfectly still. The night's uncertainty became one reason the case endured publicly. What happened inside remained hidden behind wood, curtains, and fear. By dawn, the mountain air carried nothing like an answer. The first discovery came from a daughter returning home alone. Sheila opened the door and saw a scene no child should. She ran for help, carrying shock back across the cabins. Neighbors moved quickly, while the mourning became permanently divided afterward. The younger boys were found alive, creating another impossible question. Justin Smart was also inside, unharmed and part of uncertainty. Tina was not where investigators expected a child to be. The fourth absence changed everything immediately. The case immediately became both homicide and missing child investigation. Early responders faced a scene that demanded precision and restraint. Cabin 28's living room held evidence, trauma, and unanswered sequence. Medical tape and cords became central details in official records. Investigators documented weapons found inside, including knives and a hammer. Blood evidence indicated the violence occurred within the living room. Responsible retelling requires restraint, where the record becomes almost unbearable. The scene raised questions about planning, control, and sudden escalation. Nothing confirmed motive, leaving investigators with evidence and silence alone. Every object needed careful handling, but history suggests problems emerged. Neighbors, timelines, and evidence all began moving at once together. Search efforts expanded because Tina's absence could not be ignored. Authorities looked for a child, while grief consumed Keddie quietly. The missing person question changed how the public understood the case. Sketches and descriptions were released, but certainty remained out of reach. Some early leads focused on two men, seen or discussed. Rumors spread quickly, while official answers moved much more slowly. Small-town fear grew because no arrest followed the discovery afterward. The Sharp family's surviving children carried questions no file could hold. Media attention arrived, but attention did not become resolution either. Investigators had statements, fragments, and pressure from every direction immediately. The case needed clarity, yet the evidence trail already thinned. Early mistakes would become part of Keddie's enduring controversy later. Some records later appeared disorganized, incomplete, or painfully misplaced elsewhere. Cold cases often preserve evidence, but also preserve missed chances. The original case history log was later reported missing entirely. Storage boxes held answers, but not always in usable order. Technology in 1981 limited what investigators could prove scientifically then. DNA testing was not yet the tool it would become. That delay made every physical item more important decades later. Became structural, built into the case from the start. The cabin itself eventually disappeared, leaving photographs and memory behind. Without the building, investigators leaned harder on remaining evidence later. Years passed, and Tina Sharp remained the missing fourth victim. Her name kept the case open beyond Cabin 28's walls. In 1984, remains were found far from Keddie's cabins finally. Investigators identified them as Tina, confirming the worst fear publicly. The discovery widened the geography and deepened the unresolved timeline. An anonymous call reportedly named Tina before official identification came. A recording of that call later resurfaced inside old evidence. That tape became another symbol of opportunities questioned decades later. Camp 18 added distance, isolation, and another unanswered movement west. The case no longer ended at the cabin's doorway alone. Every new detail made the missing years feel much heavier. Families waited, while official certainty stayed painfully out of reach. Public theories grew around gaps, but proof remained the standard. Responsible theory begins where confirmed facts stop, not before evidence. Martin Smart and John Bubidi became publicly discussed persons of interest. Both men died without being charged in the murders ever. Investigators examined reported statements, letters, and connections with visible caution. A reported letter raised questions, but questions are not convictions. A counselor's reported account added weight, yet remained disputed territory. Theories focused on motive, opportunity, and what Tina may have known. Still, no courtroom tested those claims against full evidence publicly. Decades later, the case was reopened with renewed determination again. Sheriff Greg Hagewood helped revive attention to the old file. Investigator Mike Gambird began sorting boxes, records, and forgotten leads. What he found suggested the past had not been organized. Some evidence reportedly sat contaminated, damaged, or poorly preserved for years. The review did not solve everything, but it changed momentum. Old evidence gained new meaning under modern investigative tools later. In 2016, a hammer was recovered from a nearby pond. Investigators considered whether it matched descriptions tied to the case. Its location raised questions about disposal, memory, and lost time. The pond search reminded Keddie that evidence can return late. New testing later focused attention on tape from the scene. In 2018, investigators reported DNA linked to a known suspect. That lead sounded significant, but no arrest followed publicly afterward. For families, hope can arrive quietly, then remain painfully suspended. The open case status keeps every lead from becoming closure. Keddie's story is also about institutional accountability and lost time. Every missing note asks what careful work might have saved. Every surviving file asks whether the next answer still exists. The public remembers Cabin 28, but families remember people first. Sue Sharp was more than the place where she died. John and Dana were teenagers, not symbols and theories online. Tina's absence became a wound wider than the cabin itself. The surviving children lived beyond headlines, carrying private consequences quietly. A respectful documentary cannot turn grief into entertainment alone, ever. The case asks viewers to hold curiosity beside compassion carefully. Unsolved does not mean unknowable, but proof still matters most. Keddie became folklore because official answers never arrived cleanly enough. Yet folklore can blur victims, evidence, and responsible doubt badly. Every retelling must separate records from rumor, and grief from spectacle. The woods remain quiet, but the questions still feel close. Cabin 28 is gone, yet its timeline still stands unresolved. Where walls disappeared, documents became the remaining architecture of truth. The old resort road carries memory without offering explanation back. Investigators still ask whether someone living knows the final answer. 40 years can weaken evidence, but not the need for answers. Justice delayed leaves families inside a room time cannot close. The final mystery is not only who entered that cabin. It is also why answers were allowed to scatter away. Old maps still point toward places that cannot answer back. Evidence boxes do not mourn, but they hold mourning carefully. Each label, date, and photograph carries somebody's unfinished hope forward. The town learned that quiet places can still keep wounds. Every cautious theory must bow before the missing courtroom answer. No responsible ending can pretend the record is fully complete. The human cost remains larger than any documentary reconstruction can show. Cold cases survive because families keep asking carefully for answers. One cabin became a symbol, but people came before symbolism. The last frame belongs to memory, not speculation or spectacle. One door opened in 1981, and questions kept walking out. The case remains open because silence never became the truth. Keddie's ending is not resolution, but a duty to remember. 4 names remain heavier than every theory built around them. Some cabins vanish, but unanswered questions keep their own address. Until proof arrives, Cabin 28 remains quietly unfinished forever.